They called him a man of God, a kind smile, a seller of lamp oil. But behind that smile was an obsession, not to sell oil, but to control everything it touched. At 16, he was already tracking every cent he spent. By 30, he wasn't just in the oil business. He was redesigning the rules of trade, law, and power itself. While others drilled wells, he built rail deals. While others sold barrels, he bought silence. And while America was still waking up to the idea of capitalism, he was already writing its invisible constitution. Today, you'll uncover how John D. Rockefeller rewired the system from the inside. With contracts instead of coups, with trust companies instead of armies, with a logic so precise it still shapes your paycheck, your groceries, your taxes. The oil? That was just bait. The real power was hidden in the contracts. And what he built still controls the game, whether you see it or not. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened because they knew he never wasted words. John D. Rockefeller wasn't loud. He was exact. He believed that time was currency, that emotions were liabilities, that the world rewarded those who planned more moves ahead than everyone else. Long before he controlled oil, he was already refining something far more powerful, his own psychology. He woke up at dawn, walked the same path, ate the same breakfast, wrote the same prayers. Routine wasn't just comfort, it was a weapon. His life became a closed circuit of control, every decision tracked, every person evaluated. He didn't attend church out of guilt or faith. He attended out of rhythm, discipline, perception, and it worked. By his mid-20s, Rockefeller was building not just a company, but a code of behavior that felt more like religion than business. He believed God favored order, and he intended to deliver it through corporate structure. Colleagues described him as calm yet unreadable. He never interrupted, rarely smiled. When he looked at you, it was like he was calculating your usefulness in real time. Behind closed doors, he kept files on everyone. Suppliers, rivals, even journalists. He knew their families, their debts, their weaknesses. Control wasn't just about what he owned. It was about what others feared he might know. He kept lists, dozens of them, of competitors, of future acquisitions, of problems he had already solved but wanted to revisit just in case the variables changed. His mind operated like a trust fund, accumulating advantage silently, compounding leverage without noise. One employee recalled, "Being in a meeting with Mr. Rockefeller was like sitting in a room full of ticking clocks. You didn't know when or how, but you knew something precise was about to happen." He treated chaos like a personal insult. He didn't gamble, didn't speculate. Everything he built twice, once on paper and once in reality. His quietness wasn't shyness, it was engineering. Rockefeller's obsession wasn't money, it was design. A company wasn't a business, it was a mechanism. A market wasn't a playground, it was a grid to be mapped and mastered. Even his philanthropy followed structure. He didn't donate from emotion. He audited charities the same way he audited refineries, checking inputs, measuring outcomes, eliminating inefficiencies. To understand his mind, you have to let go of modern ideas about ambition. This wasn't about beating competitors. This was about removing randomness from reality. It's why he hated the term luck. He once said, "If you want to succeed, you must strike out on new paths, not travel the worn paths of accepted success." In his world, Luck was for the unprepared. And so he prepared for decades. He knew that charisma fades, trends shift, markets wobble. But if you built the system that everyone depended on, you never had to run. They'd come to you. That's why Rockefeller didn't just smile. He studied how his smile was interpreted, how silence shaped perception, how slowness implied power. In a century of industrial titans, he was the quietest and the most dangerous. Because he didn't just build a company, he built a psychology of power so precise it still governs boardrooms today. This wasn't ego, it was architecture. And the smile? That was just branding. In the public imagination, John D. Rockefeller was the oil man, but that was just the cover story. He didn't win by extracting more oil. He won by making oil irrelevant to his power. Most people focused on barrels. Rockefeller focused on bottlenecks. He understood early that the oil itself was a commodity, volatile, messy, easy to copy. But the path the oil took, that could be owned. While competitors raced to drill new wells, Rockefeller quietly secured exclusive shipping deals with the railroads. He called them rebates. But they weren't discounts, they were weapons. Standard Oil paid less per barrel than its rivals, sometimes even profiting when competitors shipped their oil, because the railroads would kick back a portion of the fees paid by other companies to Rockefeller's pockets. It wasn't theft, it was paperwork. This is how he made oil secondary. It didn't matter who drilled it. If it moved, Rockefeller owned the rails it rode on. In 1871, he helped create a secret alliance called the South Improvement Company, a cartel designed to manipulate freight rates and crush small producers. The deal was hidden behind closed doors. No press, no hearings, just signatures and silence. When news of the arrangement leaked, there were protests, riots. Small refiners tried to fight back, but the damage was already done. By the time the ink dried, Rockefeller had already mapped the key corridors of oil movement and inserted Standard Oil into all of them. He didn't need to drill every well, he just needed to control the distribution logic. He treated infrastructure like chess. If he controlled the center, railroads, pipelines, storage depots, no one else could make a profitable move. Even government regulators didn't understand what he was building. They saw oil. They missed the system. He standardized everything: barrels, pricing, inspections, delivery times. He turned crude into code. And when the railroads began facing pressure, he pivoted. Pipelines. He built his own underground networks, not to transport oil, but to bypass power structures he no longer needed. It was never about the energy source. It was about becoming the indispensable infrastructure between source and sale. He once said, "The ability to deal with people is as purchasable a commodity as sugar or coffee." But what he never said publicly was that the ability to bypass people entirely was even more valuable. By the 1880s, he was so entrenched that he could make or break entire regions with a single logistical decision. Towns lived or died by whether Standard Oil serviced them. And here's the twist most historians overlook. If oil had never been discovered, Rockefeller still would have been one of the most powerful men in America, because what he built wasn't a company. It was a protocol for control, for absorbing complexity, for rewriting the rules of competition so that only one player could win. To the world, he was still the oil man, but to those who truly looked, he was something else entirely. A logistics architect, a legal strategist, a man who turned supply chains into weapons of silence. Oil? That was just the story they printed in the headlines. The real asset was infrastructure you couldn't see and couldn't escape. At a glance, it was just a freight agreement. a few cents shaved off the cost per barrel. But in reality, it was the deal that changed the economic map of the United States. In 1871, John D. Rockefeller sat down with executives from the three most powerful railroads in the country: Pennsylvania Railroad, Erie, and the New York Central. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to architect something far more ambitious: control over the flow of oil across an entire continent. The result was a pact so secret even some of the executives' own boards weren't informed. Its name? The South Improvement Company. On paper, it looked like a discount program. In practice, it was a strangulation mechanism. Rockefeller Standard Oil would receive exclusive freight rebates, massive cuts on every barrel shipped, drawbacks, payments not just for his own shipments, but a percentage of what his competitors shipped, preferential routing, first access to trains, terminals, and infrastructure. But the real brilliance wasn't in the discounts. It was in the feedback loop it created. As Standard Oil shipped more, the railroads earned more. As competitors struggled with inflated rates, they lost customers who defaulted to Rockefeller. The more they lost, the more Standard Oil gained. It was economic gravity, tilted completely in his favor. No need to buy out your rivals when you can just make their business model impossible. One by one, smaller refiners folded. Not because of worse oil, because they couldn't move it. This wasn't just market domination, it was distributional supremacy. The South Improvement Company was exposed in early 1872, triggering public outrage. Newspapers called it a conspiracy against the American people. Petroleum producers rioted in Pennsylvania. Congress held emergency hearings. The deal was scrapped, on paper. But the infrastructure, the relationships, the strategic positions Standard Oil secured through that window of access, those remained. Because while the outrage was loud, Rockefeller had already moved the board. He used that moment of scandal to go quiet, consolidate, and expand laterally. He bought pipelines, terminals, barges. He placed his men inside the accounting offices of competitors under merger offers. He learned their routes, their costs, their weaknesses. And then he replicated the rail scheme in reverse. Instead of paying for access, he started building his own routes. Pipelines that bypassed not just geography, but competition itself. In less than 5 years, Rockefeller went from a regional refiner to a logistical overlord, and he never fired a shot. He just offered terms no one could match, and then made sure no one else could either. The South Improvement Company may have died in headlines, but its DNA lived on, encoded into every contract, every distribution map, every whisper between Standard Oil and the railroads. By 1880, Standard Oil wasn't competing in the oil industry. It was dictating it. And the railroads? Once symbols of national progress, they had become silent partners in a private empire. This was the real revelation. Rockefeller didn't just move oil. He moved power across steel rails, inside ledgers, beneath public awareness. And the nation, unknowingly, began to run on tracks he laid in secret. By the 1880s, Rockefeller had done something no one in American history had ever accomplished. He didn't just dominate an industry. He created a structure where domination was invisible by design. Welcome to the age of the trust. Publicly, Standard Oil was one company. Privately, it was a spider web of dozens of separate legal entities, each owning slices of pipelines, refineries, rail contracts, tank cars, export terminals, and more. Each had its own board, its own books, but all were governed, in secret, by a central agreement signed by just 9 men. These 9 trustees, Rockefeller among them, held controlling interest in everything. And because no single company officially dominated the market, There was nothing to regulate. This was the Standard Oil Trust, the first of its kind, a legal invention that allowed total control without legal ownership. In effect, Rockefeller had split his empire into ghosts. You could never trace a straight line back to him, only loops, shells, and shadows. He created paper companies in multiple states, exploiting differences in incorporation laws. In Ohio, in New Jersey, in Delaware, each provided new tools: secrecy, tax breaks, limited liability. One subsidiary would buy storage tanks, another would lease rail cars, another would handle exports. And yet all decisions flowed from a single, unregistered office in New York. Competitors didn't even know who they were competing against. By the time they filed lawsuits or appeals, they were often facing the wrong entity. And here lies the genius. This wasn't evasion, it was engineering. Nothing was technically illegal because no law had ever imagined a structure so decentralized, yet so centralized in control. Rockefeller weaponized ambiguity. He realized that if the system couldn't see him, it couldn't stop him. So he made himself legally blurred. In 1882, when the Standard Oil Trust was formalized, it looked like a merger. In reality, it was a juridical escape act. He could now operate across multiple states with no national regulation because antitrust law didn't exist yet. By the time the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, Rockefeller's empire was already 2 steps ahead: splintered, buried, restructured. He could dissolve a company on Monday and resurrect it under another name by Tuesday. And he did. One court ordered Standard Oil to break into 34 separate firms. What they didn't realize? Many of those firms were already owned by each other. The breakup? It made him richer. His shares in the spun-off companies skyrocketed. He earned more post-breakup than during the monopoly. It wasn't a defeat. It was a financial mitosis. He turned legal attack into multiplication. By 1911, Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman. He was an architect of law, designing escape routes inside the very system meant to contain him. And in doing so, he left behind a blueprint. Today, tech giants, pharmaceutical conglomerates, and financial institutions follow that same logic. Own nothing, control everything. Hide behind entities. Let the system protect the complexity you designed. Rockefeller didn't just build a monopoly. He built a mirror maze and taught capitalism how to disappear in plain sight. If you've ever ordered something online and didn't know which company truly delivered it, if you've ever agreed to a user contract without reading it, if you've ever wondered why 5 companies seem to own everything, you're living inside a system that Rockefeller designed. He didn't just shape the oil industry, he reshaped capitalism's DNA. Before Rockefeller, markets were chaotic. Dozens of producers, unstable prices, constant bankruptcies. After Rockefeller, the ideal became consolidation, vertical integration, and controlled growth. A single point of authority, a hidden architecture. Today, we call it big tech, big pharma, Wall Street. But the skeleton is the same. Control the infrastructure. Hide behind legal entities. Use data, contracts, and logistics to build leverage no one can see until it's too late. Amazon doesn't own most of what it sells. It owns the distribution railways, just like Rockefeller. Google gives free access to products while quietly owning the rails of digital attention. Private equity firms don't need brand names because they own the contracts beneath the brands. Even philanthropy carries his fingerprint. Rockefeller pioneered the idea of foundations as power without politics, entities that could influence education, medicine, and global policy without ever being elected. Today, billionaire foundations use the same model, funding research, steering narratives, shaping agendas, all tax-exempt, all outside democratic accountability. He taught the system how to act benevolent while consolidating control. And the legal architecture he inspired? Still here. The trust became the holding company. The holding company became the shell. The shell became the fund. And now the fund becomes the algorithm. Different tools, same principle. Power isn't held in public, it's programmed in private. And even when Standard Oil was broken up, it didn't vanish. It became Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, each a fragment of the original empire, each still among the world's most powerful firms. A controlled demolition, followed by profitable rebirth. That's the final twist. Rockefeller's greatest invention wasn't a company. It was a self-replicating model of power. He proved you don't need armies or elections. You need systems, contracts, silence, and time. Today, you live in a world that runs on networks he imagined. Invisible, optimized, unquestioned. Not because he imposed it, but because we inherited it without ever asking. His legacy isn't a memory, it's a condition. They called him the Oil King, but oil was never the point. What he built was quieter, colder, permanent. A system where control isn't seen, it's felt. In the routes you follow, the prices you pay, the choices you think are yours. He didn't just reshape capitalism, he encrypted himself inside it. And now, every time you sign without reading, accept without questioning, depend without knowing, you're not just using the system, you're inside it. The empire never ended, it just stopped needing a face.